Hey guys, tonight we begin with a half-naked biped staring into the yellow eyes of something with much sharper teeth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's story together. You wake up 2 million years too early. The air is warm, your brain is small, and the local wildlife is a daily reminder that evolution isn't finished yet. You're standing in the African savanna, naked, nervous, and roughly as edible as a rotisserie chicken without the seasoning. You're not the hunter. You're the unpaid intern of the food chain. Everything around you has fangs, claws, or both. Lions stalk the grasslands. Hyenas laugh in the dark. Saber-toothed cats exist for the sole purpose of ruining your day. Your best defense is running, which would work great if you weren't built like a refrigerator on legs. You huddle with your tiny tribe, about a dozen equally anxious proto-humans who all look like they just remembered they left the fire at home. Communication is limited to grunts that all mean the same thing. Panic. You don't have language yet, but everyone intuitively understands we're screwed. You spend most of your time looking for berries, water, and reasons not to die. When you find a carcass, you wait for the predators to finish eating, then politely pick through the leftovers like a prehistoric janitor. The smell alone could kill you, but hey, protein is protein. At night, you climb a tree, hug a branch, and try not to think about how fragile you are. Down below, the dark moves. Hyenas giggle. Lions yawn loudly. Somewhere in the distance, something screams. It's probably Greg. There's always a Greg. And yet, somehow, you survive. You start learning patterns. Which noises mean danger, which direction the wind blows, and which of your group members can be safely outrun. Eventually, you realize something profound. Sticking together helps, not emotionally, but mathematically. If you're with friends, the odds of you dying go down by at least 1. That's the first spark of humanity. Not art or language, but mutually assured survival. You don't help others out of compassion. You help them because next time it might be you face down in the mud. And it would be nice if someone cared enough to poke you with a stick. Congratulations, you've just invented empathy by accident and under extreme duress. You've made it through another night, which is impressive, considering you went to sleep in a world where everything either bites, stings, or steps on you. Survival is basically a hobby now. Not because you're good at it, but because you haven't had the decency to die yet. Your tribe wakes up at dawn. No one talks, mostly because no one knows how. But the collective vibe is still alive somehow. The ground is littered with tracks from hyenas, big cats, and at least one mysterious creature you really hope migrated somewhere else. Everyone stretches like they have an early meeting with destiny. And then you all go scavenging for breakfast, or what's left of someone else's breakfast. Food is hard to come by. Sometimes you get lucky and find berries. Sometimes you'll find the half-chewed leg of something that used to run faster than you. Either way, you pretend it's delicious and try not to think about the texture. And yet, something strange is happening. You're starting to notice patterns, not just in animals, but in each other. You remember the one who fell last week and got dragged off by a lion. You also remember that you didn't leave them behind this time. You and the group actually ran back, yelling and throwing rocks. It was chaotic, brave, and mostly stupid, but it worked. The lion left, probably out of sheer confusion. A few days later, that same injured group member is still alive. They can't walk well, but you're sharing food with them. You protect them at night. It's inconvenient and risky, but you do it anyway. Something inside you, somewhere between instinct and indigestion, says it's the right thing to do. That's when it hits you. Survival might not be a solo sport. You're realizing that keeping someone else alive increases everyone's odds. When they heal, they can hunt. When they watch, you can sleep. It's like teamwork, only louder and smellier. Soon, you'll be caring for the sick, feeding the wounded, and forming bonds deeper than hunger. It's not charity. It's evolution doing emotional blackmail. And just like that, saving others becomes humanity's most effective survival strategy. You didn't invent kindness. You just weaponized it. It starts, as most bad ideas do, with screaming. You're out scavenging with your group. Just another normal day in the Pletoin neighborhood when a distant shriek cuts through the air. It's Greg again. It's always Greg. You turn and see him getting dragged into the grass by something large, striped, and uninterested in sharing. The rational part of your brain says, unfortunate, but that's life. The irrational part, the new, weirdly sentimental human part says, we should probably go get him. So, for the first time in history, a group of small, anxious primates does the unthinkable. You run toward the predator. There's no plan, no strategy, no hero music. Just 10 panicking bipeds, flinging rocks, screaming incoherently, and waving sticks that are far too short for the occasion. The tiger hesitates, confused by the sudden burst of stupidity. You don't look brave, you look insane, but apparently that's enough. The predator drops Greg and bolts. You've just invented the rescue mission now. Greg is bleeding, half-conscious, and missing a few pieces, but he's alive. Everyone stands around awkwardly, unsure of what to do next. You carry him back to camp, which takes forever, because Greg's heavier than expected and keeps whining. Someone fetches leaves. Someone else just stares, impressed that this ridiculous plan actually worked. Over the next few weeks, Greg heals slowly. You share food with him, chase away scavengers, and take turns keeping him warm at night. He contributes nothing except bad smells and grunts of appreciation. But when he finally stands again, something changes in the air. You all realize you've done something extraordinary. You cheated nature's rules. You weren't supposed to win that fight. You weren't supposed to save the wounded. You weren't supposed to cooperate beyond mating and screaming. But here you are, one tiger short, one friend richer. Saving Greg didn't make you saints. It made you stronger. A rescued human meant one more pair of eyes, one more thrower of rocks, and one less reason to panic alone. And from that single act of collective recklessness, humanity learned its first moral lesson. Sometimes survival requires stupidity with a purpose. You've discovered a new emotion, dread with a side of responsibility. Ever since you and your tribe saved Greg from becoming tiger lasagna, something's changed. You don't just fear predators anymore. You fear losing each other, which is progress, but also exhausting. Now, every rustle in the tall grass feels personal. You can't relax. You can't nap. And you can't stop looking around like a paranoid mercat on espresso. Congratulations, you've just invented anxiety. Evolutionally speaking, it's a hit. At night, you sit huddled with your group, listening to the laughter of hyenas echoing in the dark. It's the soundtrack of your nightmares. The elders, which just means anyone over 30, tell stories about the great beasts that once ate Cousin Rock. You all nod solemnly, pretending this isn't going to happen again next week. But now, instead of running in 10 different directions like terrified squirrels, your tribe actually plans. You start posting lookouts. You choose sleeping spots closer to cliffs and trees. Someone even suggests taking turns staying awake, and everyone agrees as long as it's not their turn. That's the first night watch, and naturally, it goes terribly. The lookout falls asleep 10 minutes in. Still, the idea sticks. Fear becomes organization. Organization becomes survival. You learn to recognize the shapes of predators by moonlight, their tracks in the dirt, and the faint musky smell of we're about to die. When someone shouts, "Lion," you don't scatter. You form a noisy semicircle of bravery and bad posture. It's not much, but it's something. The younger members practiced throwing stones farther. The older ones discover that shouting together is surprisingly intimidating. And slowly, your tribe begins to master the one weapon no predator can counter: coordination. You haven't conquered fear. You franchised it. Everyone gets a small share. It binds you, shapes you, and keeps you alive. You start realizing that being scared isn't weakness, it's strategy. Fear makes you alert. It keeps you from wandering off alone. It makes you care whether Greg gets eaten again. For the first time, you're not just surviving despite fear. You're surviving because of it. You don't know who first figured it out, but one day, someone threw a stick into the fire and realized it kept glowing instead of dying. And just like that, the food chain got updated. Congratulations, you've unlocked fire, humanity's first subscription-based safety plan. At first, everyone's terrified of it. Fire hisses, spits, and eats anything it touches. But once you realize lions won't come near it, the whole tribe agrees it's worth keeping around. Suddenly, you're sitting by a small circle of light while the world's apex predators glare from the shadows, probably filing complaints with nature's customer service. The campfire becomes your new god. You feed it, protect it, and stare into it like it's Wi-Fi. It's hypnotic. The crackle drowns out the night. The warmth makes the cold bearable. And the smell of smoke masks your usual wet mammal aroma. For the first time, you can sit without flinching at every sound. It's bliss, primitive, flickering bliss. Then the politics begin. Who controls the fire? Who gathers the wood? Who gets to sit closest? Within hours, humanity invents twothings, comfort and conflict. Someone decides they're in charge of fire management, and everyone else immediately disagrees. The group splits into factions, those who think it should burn brighter, and those who think it's fine the way it is. Welcome to the world's first committee meeting. Still, despite the arguing, something magical happens. You start talking, not in words yet, but in noises, gestures, and dramatic facial expressions. You tell stories about hunts, storms, and the time Greg nearly got eaten again. You don't know it, but you've just invented storytelling, the ancient art of exaggerating things that barely happened. Around the fire, you become something more than a group of nervous apes. You become a tribe. You share food, warmth, and gossip. You laugh, or whatever prehistoric laughing sounded like. You start to feel connected, not just by survival, but by memory. The fire keeps predators away, but more importantly, it keeps you together. And as you sit watching the sparks float into the night, you realize the truth. It's not the fire that changed everything. It's the talking that started because of it. You've got Fireno, warmth, light, and the illusion that the universe doesn't actively want you dead. But there's a catch. Fire, it needs feeding, guarding, and occasionally reviving, because Samiana got distracted trying to poke it with a stick. That someone is almost always Greg. It's the middle of the night. The fire's fading, and the cold is creeping in like an unpaid bill. Everyone looks at each other, silently arguing with their eyes over who's going to get up and fix it. Eventually, you realize no one's volunteering. This is how humanity invents the concept of responsibility. You take turns feeding the fire, the first rotation system in history. It's simple. If you're awake, you protect that. If you're asleep, you're the reason everyone's tense. At first, it's chaos. People fall asleep on shift, forget to bring wood, or accidentally set small things on fire like themselves. But slowly, the system starts to work. Then someone comes up with an even more radical idea. Trust. You start to believe the others will actually do their part. When they say, "I've got it," you don't stay awake just to check. You close your eyes and let go. For the first time, you experience peace. Well, light paranoia with a side of warmth. Congratulations. You've entered the world's first social contract. You protect me. I protect you. No signatures, no laws, just mutual anxiety keeping everyone in line. It's civilization in beta form. Unstable, but soon this unwritten agreement expands. You share food, divide tasks, and cover for Greg when he forgets to watch the fire again. You start recognizing patterns of fairness and betrayal. Someone eats more than their share. They get glares. Someone risks their life for another. They get respect and maybe extra mammoth fat. Over time, these little exchanges form a primitive moral code. It's not about right or wrong. It's about balance. Do your part and the tribesser don't, and you get quietly lost on the next hunting trip. You think you've invented ethics. Really, you've just invented teamwork under threat of abandonment. But hey, progress is progress. It's one of those peaceful mornings. The kind where the air is calm, the birds are chirping, and you're wondering which direction death will come from today. The tribe is moving through tall grass, carrying sharpened sticks that you call weapons, and predators call snacks. Then it happens. A boar bursts out of nowhere and impales one of your group. Not Greg this time, miraculously, but someone you actually liked. The creature flees, leaving behind a bleeding mess of limbs and shock. The group freezes. The smart move is to leave him. The human move is not to, so you stay. You press sleeves against the wound. You drag him back to camp, leaving a trail so obvious even a blind hyena could follow it. Butu don't care. Somewhere between instinct and stupidity, you've made a choice. You don't abandon your own. That night, everyone sits by the fire, taking turns watching over the injured one. You feed him water. You clean the wound with whatever doesn't immediately sting. You even share food with him, which feels noble until you realize you're now hungrier than the patient. He groans, twitches, and occasionally glares at you like he regrets not dying. Still, he lives another day. Days turn into weeks. The wound starts to close. He starts walking again, slowly but alive. Thet tribe cheers. You're proud, mostly because you weren't sure the experiment in medical care wouldn't just turn into waiting for decomposition. And as ridiculous as it all felt, something sacred has quietly formed: loyalty. You've learned that blood spellitation builds bonds thicker than language. You know who will run into danger with you and who will pretend toady their sandals instead. This shared madness, risking your life for someone else's bad luck, becomes tradition. You fight together, you heal together, and when one falls, the others stand over them until the danger passes. It's not religion yet, but it's close. You didn't invent brotherhood out of love. You invented it out of necessity. But over time, the two started to look suspiciously similar. And so through blood, panic, and poor risk assessment, you became a species that fights back together. You used to think compassion was for the weak. Now you're realizing it's just another survival tactic that opens to feel nice. Somewhere between patching wounds and yelling at Greg for eating the emergency berries, your tribahas started doing something strange, caring on purpose. One morning, you find an elder lying by the river, too weak to stand. In nature's eyes, they're expired inventory, but instead of walking away, you give them water. Someone brings food. Someone else fans the flies away. You're not sure why. They can't hunt, can't fight, and their only contribution is unsolicited advice about rocks. Still, you do it. This becomes routine. You start checking on the sick, sharing leftovers, making sure the little ones don't wander into crocodile country. It's inconvenient, time-consuming, and statistically bad for your calorie balance. But weirdly, it works. The more people you keep alive, the more people there are to help you later. Compassion, it turns out, has excellent return on investment. Soon, your tribe develops a whole caregiving system. Someone tends fire. Someone watches the injured. Someone, usually you, gets stuck running errands for both. The tribe isn't just surviving anymore. It's maintaining itself. Congratulations, you've just invented basic healthcare without paperwork. Of course, not everyone's thrilled. Some argue that keeping the weak alive attracts predators. Others point out that compassion takes valuable time away from rock throwing and mammoth avoidance. You nod, pretend to agree, and then sneak back to feed the old man. Anyway, you can't explain it, but it feels right. One night, as you sit by the fire, the elder you helped mumbles a few sounds, something soft, grateful, maybe even affectionate. You don't understand the words, but you understand the feeling. You're connected. That's the real upgrade. Empathy is software. It doesn't make you faster or stronger. It just makes you better together. Predators may still hunt you. Hunger may still stalk you. But now, when one of you falls, the others reach out. Not because they have to, but because they can. And that, surprisingly, might be the first moment in history where being human didn't feel like a punishment. You've spent most of your life as walking protein. Everything with teeth has tried to eat you at least once. But lately, something's shifted. The predators are hesitating. The lions watch from a distance. The hyenas laughless. Even the saber-toothed cats seem unsure if the effort is worth the chew. You and your tribe aren't faster or stronger or smarter, not yet. But you've discovered the one evolutionary superpower that changes everything. Spite. When one of yours gets attacked, you don't run. You grab sticks, stones, and anything vaguely throwable, and you chase the predator away loudly, chaotically, and with the energy of a toddler defending their snack. Sabertooths works. Sometimes you just make the predator deeply uncomfortable. Either way, you've invented revenge. Soon, our species start noticing. The big cats realize that attacking a human means getting swarmed by 10 screaming bipeds throwing rocks like they're auditioning for a band called Panic and Stones. You're not a prey animal anymore. You're an inconvenience. The dynamic flips. Lions stop hunting near your camp. Hyenas circle from farther away. Even vultures look frustrated. Nature, it seems, didn't account for the power of organized stupidity. The real turning point comes when you kill your first predator. You don't mean to. You were just overcompensating. But there it is, a dead leopard. Its body surrounded by sticks, bruises, and confused humans, realizing what just happened. The tribe drags the carcass back to camp and stares at it for hours. It's part horror, part pride, part should we eat this? Someone eventually says yes, and history's first poorly cooked revenge meal is served. It tastes terrible, but victory tastes good. From that day on, predators have a new problem. You bite back. You're still small, fragile, and slightly dumb, but now you're dangerous in groups. You've changed the game, not through strength, but through audacity. You don't know it yet, but this is the first crack in the natural order. For the first time, the apex predators, oft-world, look at your campfire, hear your laughter, and realize something horrifying. Dinner has developed teamwork. The days belong to you now, mostly. You can walk the plains without constantly assuming your obituary is being written in paw prints. But the nights are still terrifying. Darkness is where nature hides its horror movie budget. The moment the sun dips, the temperature drops, and everything that didn't eat during the day comes looking for a midnight snack. That snack, as always, is you. So you adapt. Your tribe builds fires around the sleeping area, glowing circles of safety that keep the dark at a polite distance. The flames pop and crackle, throwing strange shadows on the rocks. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and nervous optimism. You've learned the hard way that the universe doesn't do refunds, so you keep your guard up. That tribe assigns watch duty. You take turns sitting by the fire, staring into the void, and trying not to imagine how close death is. It's peaceful for about 5 minutes. Then your brain starts composing every possible way things could go wrong. Welcome to the first documented case of night shift anxiety. You sit there, clutching a half-burnt stick, listening to the rustling grass. Every sound is suspicious. A twig snaps, probably wind. Another sound, definite linnet wind. You squint into the dark, heart pounding, trying to see what your instincts are already screaming about. Nothing happens. Hours pass. Your eyes. You've learned that vigilance feels exactly like insomnia. Sometimes you hear growls in the distance. Sometimes glowing eyes flash beyond the firelight, watching, calculating, but they don't come closer. You realize the fire isn't just light. It's a warning sign. It says, this food bites back. Eventually, you're relieved by the next watcher, someone equally miserable and half asleep. You lie down, curling near the warmth, knowing someone else is now responsible for your continued existence. It's oddly comforting. You've built something resembling trust, or at least a shared sense of dread. And that's how humanity conquered the dark. Not with courage, but with insomnia and teamwork. When Thiessen rises, you wake to birdsong and ash, alive again. You look at your tribe, tired, smelly, but still here, and realize something profound. Safety, it turns out, isn't the absence of danger. It's just taking turns, worrying. Got it. You like to think you invented teamwork. But then you meet the Neanderthals, stockier, stronger, and suspiciously better at surviving winter. They make you look like the off-brand version of humanity. They're the older cousins who went to trade school while you were still figuring out how to sit by the fire without burning your knees. At first, you think they're intimidating. Broad shoulders, big skulls, those deep-set eyes that say, I could bench press you. But then you notice something unexpected. They care for each other genuinely. Not just the usual, don't die because I need your help type. Actually term emotional investment. It's unsettling. You find an injured Anions limping along with a crude wooden crutch. His legs bent in a way legs shouldn't be, and yet he's alive. His tribe feeds him, shelters him, and makes sure he doesn't get left behind. You stare, wondering how a creature capable of crushing rocks with its forehead can also practice compassion. It's like watching a bear knit. As time goes on, you see more signs. Burials with flowers, carefully arranged stones, bodies covered in ochre pigment, rituals, not instincts. These people don't just survive together, they remember together. You start to realize they've taken the idea of protecting your own and upgraded it into culture. You feel oddly inspired and slightly jealous. Your tribe tries to imitate them. Someone breaks an arm and instead of shrugging, you all help carry them back. Someone dies and you don't just walk away this time. You pile rocks over the body, clumsy but deliberate. You didn't fully understand what you're doing, but it feels like respect. The Neanderthals show you something profound. Survival doesn't just mean breathing. It means being seen, remembered. You begin to care about what happens after someone's gone. Not because it helps you live, but because it helps you feel human. You'll never admit it, of course. When someone asks why you buried Greg with flowers, you just grunt. Seemed practical, but deep down, you know the truth. You didn't do it for practicality. You did it because for the first time in history, the dead weren't just gone. They mattered. You've mastered compassion, cooperation, and late-night anxiety. You've buried your dead and fed your injured. Very wholesome stuff. But eventually, you realize something. Being nice doesn't stop you from starving. And that's how you invent organized violence. It begins innocently enough. Your tribe spots a herd of something large, slow, and extremely edible. You all exchange mindful grunts. One person picks up a sharp stick. Another sharpens it more beckus. That's how innovation works. Within hours, you're all holding spears and pretending you know what to do with them. You surround the herd. Everyone moves in silence, except Greg, whose knees. The herd panics. One charges, one falls, and chaos erupts. You scream, run, throw, trip, and somehow stab something that bleeds in your direction. Miraculously, it dies before you do. The tribe celebrates. There's jumping, shouting, and a lot of accidental stabbing during high fives. You've killed your first meal as a team. It's messy, exhausting, and slightly traumatizing, but it works. From this day forward, together doesn't just mean let's not die. It means let's kill something bigger than us. Word spreads fast. Nearby tribes see your hunting success and either want to copy you or fight you for your mammoth steaks. Within a generation, cooperation evolves into coordination, and coordination evolves into warfare. You've gone from protecting each other to let's make sure they don't eat our food. Your ancestors will be so proud. Before long, you're inventing strategies, ambushes, decoys, the ancient art of let's shove this guy forward and see what happens. Everyone suddenly has opinions on leadership, and nobody listens to anyone else. Still, you win more often than you lose. But here's the twist. The same skills that let you kill better also make you protect better. You defend your camp, your food, your people. Violence, once random, becomes collective. Theurk, twin of compassion. It's the first time in history empathy and aggression share the same tent. You don't realize it yet, but this mix, this dangerous cocktail of love and fury, is what will one day build cities, raise armies, and start empires. For now, though, you just know one thing. Teamwork gets results, especially when you're armed. By now, your tribe has developed a reputation. Brave, loyal, and just smart enough to serve another day. You save your wounded, protect your weak, and share a food. It's all very touching, but every system eventually fails. And in your case, it fails hilariously. It starts when you decide to rescue someone you shouldn't. Maybe it's a stranger. Maybe it's Greg again. It's probably Greg. He's injured, loud, and bleeding enough to make you a walking neon sign for predators. You drag him back anyway because you've decided kindness is your brand now. That night, the scent of blood, fire flickers as you hear it circle. Patient, quiet, and very interested in Greg's leg. Your tribe panics. Half grab weapons, half grab each other. For 30 seconds, civilization teeters on the edge of extinction again. Eventually, you scare it off, but not before realizing a painful truth. Compassion has side effects. Saving the weak makes the group slower. Feeding the sick drains your supplies. Sometimes you risk everyone for one person who contributes nothing but new reasons to stay awake at night. You start arguing. The group splits into two: team empathy and team efficiency. One side insists every life is sacred. The other side quietly sharpens rocks. Meetings get tense. Someone suggests ethical abandonment, which sounds sophisticated until you realize it means we leave Greg next time. You don't, of course. You keep helping, but you do it more carefully. You cover the wounded in leaves to hide the smell. You rotate guards. You invent the first rule of survival ethics. Be nice, but not so. Over time, you learn balance. Compassion isn't about saving everyone, it's about saving the tribe. Sometimes that means helping. Sometimes that means running faster. You become pragmatic, philosophical even. You realize love without boundaries just feeds the lions. And so, humanity evolves, not by buying perfect, but by arguing about what good actually means. In short, you and in true human fashion, immediately turned it into a debate. You'll be proud to know we've kept that tradition going ever since. You've learned to fight, to care, and to not let Greg ruin everything. But the real secret of survival isn't strength or speed, it's trust. And in your world, trust is about as rare as a full night's sleep. Still, it begins in small ways. You start noticing who shows up when things go wrong, who stands beside you when the hyenas get too close. Who actually takes their turn at fire duty instead of pretending to gather wood until sunrise. Over time, patterns form. You know who's dependable, who's flaky, and who's better off as bait. You don't have language yet, but you don't need it. One glance says everything. I've got you. Or occasionally, you first, I'll watch. Trust becomes the invisible rope that holds your fragile tribe together. And like all ropes, it occasionally snaps. Because the moment you start trusting people, they start disappointing you. Someone eats more than their share. Someone falls asleep on watch. Someone definitely lies about how much mammoth they contributed. And yet you forgive them mostly because you need them. Civilization, as it turns out, is built on strategic forgiveness. Then comes the real test. One day, you're far from camp, scouting for water, when a predator ambushes you. You run, stumble, and fall. Because, of course, you do. You brace for the end. But instead of leaving, your companion turns back. They scream, wave their arms, and throw rocks until the predator retreats. You live, that night, as you sit by the fire. You look across the flames and lock eyes with the person who risked their life for you. Something in your brain shifts. This isn't just survival anymore. It's connection. Dangerous, irrational, and profoundly human. You trust them completely now. You'd share food with them, watch their back, maybe even forgive them if they stole your favorite. That's how tribes turn into families. Not by blood, but by shared neared experiences. Trust, you realize, is the first luxury you've ever earned. It makes the cold warmer, the fear quieter, and the future slightly less impossible. And in a world full of things trying to eat you, that's close enough to love. So, after all the running, bleeding, and near-death teamwork, you finally have your answer. Did early humans save each other from predators? Yes, constantly, stupidly, heroically. You weren't built to serve. You were built to cooperate under extreme duress. You were soft, slow, and screamingly edible. But yeah, you had each other. And somehow that was enough. When danger came, you didn't. You formed circles, yelled nonsense, and threw rocks until the universe gave up trying to kill you. You stayed up all night guarding the fire. You carried the wounded when it made no sense to. You dragged Greg back from death at least 3 times. And not one seated, you get a thank you. That's fine. You didn't do it for glory. You did it because the alternative was extinction. Over time, survival stopped being a sala project. You stopped living with fear and started living for each other. Compassion became empathy, became armor. You realize that the only thing scarier than a hungry lion was being alone. That's the real evolutionary miracle. Not tools or fire or language. It's the decision to reach out when everything else in nature told you to run. You did become human by inventing weapons. You became human by inventing rescue. Even though, thousands of years later, the instinct remains. You still form groups when you still gather around glowing lights in the dark, though now they're screens instead of fires. You still talk, share stories, and comfort strangers who will never meet you. Different world, same wiring. And somewhere deep in your DNA, an ancient voice whispers, "Don't leave anyone behind." So yes, you did save each other. Not because you were noble, but because you were terrified. Because your fear was shared, and so was your courage. Because saving someone else was somehow same as saving yourself. And that strange, stubborn instinct toasted between danger and another fragile human is why you're here, breathing, watching, listening, instead of just another set of bones on the savannah. Turns out, survival was never about strength. It was about sticking together and screaming louder than the lions. It began not in the green forests of but under the scorching sun of the Holy Land. The year was 1190, and the German Crusaders were dying by the dozens outside the city of Acre. The Third Crusade had dragged on into a miserable stalemate. Heat, disease, and exhaustion had done what the Saracens' blades could not. Amid this misery, a group of German pilgrims decided that if heaven wouldn't send help, they would build it themselves. They pitched a tent of white cloth, not for prayer, but for mercy, and began tending to the sick and wounded. That humble hospital tent would become the foundation of one of the most feared orders in medieval Europe, the Teutonic Knights. At first, they were not warriors at all. Their mission was compassion, not conquest. They called themselves Fratres du Hospitalis Sancte Mariae Teutonicorum, the brothers of the German hospital of St. Mary in Jerusalem. A mouthful, yes, but fitting for men who tried to heal others in the middle of a holy war. Still, like all things in the medieval world, charity soon met ambition. Within a decade, they began to shift from nurses to knights, trading their bandages for swords and their tents for fortresses. The transformation was blessed by power. In 1198, Pope Innocent III, the same pope who later launched the Albigensian Crusade, officially recognized the order. They now stood on equal footing with the Templars and Hospitallers. Their white cloaks, marked by a black cross, became symbols of purity and dread. They were to be monks and soldiers, both, living by vows of poverty and chastity while wielding steel in God's name. A strange contradiction, but medieval Europe thrived on contradictions. By the early 13th century, the Teutonic Order had found its purpose. While the Templars guarded pilgrims and the Hospitallers defended the sick, the Teutonic Knights became a weapon. German discipline wrapped in divine justification. They would soon abandon the burning sands of the Holy Land and turn their gaze north toward the cold, pagan lands of Prussia and Livonia. There, they would carve a new kind of crusade, one not for Jerusalem, but for what began as mercy and Acre was about to become a holy machine built for. By the early 1200s, the Holy Land had become a graveyard for crusaders. Jerusalem was lost. The desert drained fortunes, and Muslim forces were stronger than ever. The Teutonic Knights, disciplined, organized, and hungry for purpose, realized something vital. There were plenty of heathens to fight closer to home. Enter the Baltic frontier, a cold, forested expanse inhabited by pagan Prussians, Lithuanians, and Livonians, who had somehow missed the memo about Christianity. For a knight with a sword and a divine excuse, this was paradise. Their relocation began under the cunning guidance of Hermann von Zaza, the Order's fourth Grand Master. Unlike most knights, he had more diplomacy than ego, and managed to charm both emperors and popes. Emperor Frederick II, the so-called wonder of the world, granted them independence and privileges in 1226 through the Golden Bull of Rimini. This document allowed the Teutonic Order to conquer, rule, and Christianize lands in the name of the empire. In other words, go north, take everything, and send back prayers. So they marched, black crosses gleaming against snow, banners fluttering in the Baltic winds. They crossed into Prussia like a storm. Their mission was simple on parchment and brutal in practice. Convert the pagans or kill them trying. Monks by title, soldiers by nature. The Teutonic knights built their castles with stone and fear. Fortresses like Marienwerderand Thorn rose along the Vistula River, each a spear point in their expanding domain. Local tribes resisted fiercely, but medieval conversion campaigns weren't known for gentle persuasion. They called their new realm Terra Christi, the land of Christ. But it was really the land of iron discipline. The Teutonic Order functioned like a holy corporation. Every knight was a shareholder in salvation, every battle investment in divine approval. Their rules were strict: obedience, celibacy, and silence at meals. Yet they were remarkably efficient. ONUF, the first organizations in medieval Europe to combine religious zeal with bureaucratic precision. By the mid-13th century, Prussia was burning, but the order was thriving. Villages became towns, fortresses became capitals, and the cross rose over conquered temples. The Teutonic Knights had found their destiny in the frozen north, not as healers, but as architects of a Christian empire carved from heathen blood. By the mid-13th century, the Teutonic Order had turned Prussia from a wild frontier into a laboratory for conquest. They didn't just fight. They built, planned, and ruled with German precision. What had once been pagan forest land was now a patchwork of castles, towns, and farmlands, all operating under the iron logic of the order. The Prussians, who resisted conversion, found themselves crucified by taxation instead of the sword. In the name of the Virgin Mary, the Teutonic Knights had created something new, a military theocracy, half monastery, half warmachine. At the heart of this crusader estate stood the fortress of Marienburg, an enormous brick citadel on the Noga Triver. It wasn't merely a castle. It was a statement. Towering walls, red towers, and Gothic halls all declared the same thing. God rules here, but we manage the details. Inside, the Grand Master ruled like a prince, surrounded by clerks, knights, and priests, all sworn to poverty, yet living in astonishing discipline and order. The daily rhythm was prayer, planning, and patrol. If you weren't sharpening a sword, you were maintaining the ledger of souls. The Prussian crusade was more than a war. It was asbestum. Each conquered area was divided into Comptar, administrative districts ruled by commanders who reported directly to the Grand Master. Churches sprouted beside fortresses, monasteries by watchtowers. Trade followed soon after. Amber, timber, grain, and furs began flowing through Teutonic ports like Danzig and Königsberg. The order had transformed warfare into a form of statecraft. Their soldiers sprayed like monks, fought like mercenaries, and governed like accountants. Yet beneath this organized piety simmered arrogance. The Teutonic Knights saw themselves as chosen instruments, avdivine justice, Germans civilizing the unwashed pagan masses. To locals, they were conquerors in cloaks, not saviors. The old Prussian tribes, the Sambians, Natangians, and Bartians, were wiped out, absorbed, or enslaved. But to the knights, it was holy arithmetic. One less heathen, one more Christian. By the 1300s, their power was unmatched in the Baltic. They had outlived the Templars, eclipsed the Hospitallers, and turned a failed crusade into a functioning empire. From Acre's sands to Prussia's now, the Teutonic Order had reinvented itself. A brotherhood of monks who ruled not from prayer books, but from the fortress walls of Marienburg. While Western Europe was busy with Shalak tournaments and cathedral building, the Teutonic Knights waged a quieter, colder crusade. The Baltic frontier was their Jerusalem now, and every river, hill, and forest became a battlefield for the souls of pagans. Lithuania, Livonia, and Samogitia were not just names on a map. They were spiritual targets. To the knights, this was God's unfinished business. To the locals, it was colonization with a halo. From their fortress network, the order launched wave after wave of campaigns into pagan lands. The knights rode under banners stitched with black crosses, carrying relics and iron discipline in equal measure. Their war cries mixed with hymns, and before each battle they knelt in the snow to pray, not for mercy, but for victory. When they rose, the sword of Christ became the sword of conquest. Villages that resisted baptism were burned. Thostad accepted it, soon learned that conversion didn't stop the taxes. This was not a crusade for faith alone. It was for territory, trade routes, and power. The Lithuanians, however, were no easy prey. They fought back with guerrilla cunning, ambushing, retreating, and striking again. Their forests became traps, their marshes natural fortresses. For decades, the order poured men and money into the Baltic, hoping to finish the Northern Crusade. But Lithuania had something the order didn't: adaptability. They united under strong rulers, like Mindaugas and Gedinas, who blended pagan resilience with shrewd diplomacy. Eventually, the Lithuanians even found allies among Christian kingdoms, eager to see the proud Teutons humbled. Still, theater pressed on, framing their wars as divine missions, blessed by Rome. There recruited knights from across Europe, nobles eager to wash away sins in blood and snow. Young men from Saxony, Franconia, and Austria flocked to Prussia for glory, gold, or a slightly better afterlife. Each campaign was brutal, each winter harsher than the last, but every burned village and rebuilt fortress made the order stronger, or so they thought. By the late 1300s, the Teutonic Knights had reached their zenith. Their influence stretched from the Vistula to the Gulf of Finland. They had baptized rivers in blood and erected crosses on smoking ruins. Yet beneath their triumph, a quiet truth grew like frost under stone. The harder they fought to expand, the more fragile their crusader empire became. By the early 14th century, the Teutonic Order stood at its glittering peak. From their brick fortress, at Marienburg. They ruled a state that stretched across the Baltic, a theocracy disguised as a military corporation. Their black cross had become a brand recognized across Christendom. Pilgrims visited their strongholds to marvel at their discipline. Merchants traded under their protection, and kings courted their favor. Even popes whispered blessings for their holy efficiency. For a brief, cold century, the order looked unstoppable. Marienburg itself was a marvel, a cathedral of brick, iron, and its high walls could house over 3,000 men, with chapels, armories, kitchens, libraries, and even breweries, all built into its sprawling complex. Every stone seemed carved with the same message: God favors structure. The Grand Master ruled from the high castle, wearing armor beneath his robes, and presiding over councils that decided everything from fort construction to grain taxes. Bureaucracy had become sacred. Prayer and paperwork were the same divine language. Inside the order, ranks were strictly defined. Knights, noble-born and sworn to chastity, formed the elite. Beneath them were priests and sergeants, followed by lay brothers who handled the business of empire, managing estates, organizing harvests, and collecting tithes. The system worked like clockwork, powered by fear of both God and superiors. Silence was enforced during meals. Personal property was forbidden, and disobedience could lead to exile, flogging, or worse. Yet somehow, the Zion rigidity produced results. The order's wealth multiplied. Its trade in amber and grain flourished, and its network of vassal towns grew into early models of civic life. Externally, Teutonic knights portrayed themselves as defenders of civilization against pagan chaos. They built Gothic cathedrals, conquered temples, founded cities like Danzig and Königsberg, and encouraged settlers from Germany to colonize their lands. In a sense, they brought progress, but only on their terms. Local Prussians and Bolts became second-class subjects in their own homeland, often reduced to serfdom under Christian landlords. Still, within the medieval world's logic, the order's achievements were dazzling. They had tamed a wilderness, built a state, and married faith with persecution. Yet, like all golden ages, this one gleamed brightest just before it cracked. The Teutonic knights had mastered conquest and governance, but not humility. Pride, as Scripture warns, always precedes the fall, and theirs was coming on horseback wearing Polish armor. These summer of 1410 would change everything. On July 15th, near a small village in Poland called Grunwald, or Tannenberg, as the Germans knew it, the Teutonic Order met its destiny. For decades, the knights had bullied their neighbors, taxed their subjects, and waged endless crusades under the banner of holy duty. But now the prey had teeth. A new alliance had formed between Poland's King Władysław Yagawa and his cousin Vitus, Grand Duke of Lithuania. A Christian alliance, ironically forged to crush the so-called soldiers of Christ. The order marched into battle with confidence, bordering on delusion. They fielded one of the finest armies in Europe, disciplined knights in shining armor banners, fluttering with black crosses, and the Grand Master, Ulrich von Ingen himself, leading from the front. Their enemy, however, wasn't the scattered pagans of old, but a united modern army, combining Polish cavalry, Lithuanian light horsemen, and Tatar auxiliaries. The battlefield was soaked, not just with blood, but with irony. Christian against Christian. With only pride deciding who wore the halo. The battle began under a hot sun. The Lithuanians launched the first assault, skirmishing and fighting retreat, a classic tactic that drew the Teutons into overextending. Believing victory was certain, the knights charged, heavy armor gleaming, into what they thought was a fleeing enemy. Instead, they found themselves around. The Polish banners surged forward, cutting off their escape, and chaos spread among the ranks. The Grand Master fell in battle, his white cloak trampled into the mud, a symbol of divine arrogance meeting human reality. Bivening, the once invincible order was shattered. Thousands of knights lay dead, their banners burned or captured. The survivors fled to Marienburg, where Ethe braced for annihilation. Yet, miraculously, their fortress held. The Polish-Lithuanian siege failed to break the walls, and the order survived, but only as a ghost of its former self. Grunwald marked the turning point. Their aura of invincibility was gone. Europeano saw them not as holy warriors, but as arrogant relics of a bygone age. The Teutonic Order still possessed castles and land, but the spirit that had built them, that blend of faith, discipline, and terror, was gone. The snow of Prussia would never again echo with the confident march of crusaders. The fall had begun, and the proud monks of war were about to learn humility the hard way. After Grunwald, the Teutonic Order limped rather than marched. The once mighty machine that had ruled the Baltic with iron faith was now a wounded relic clinging to its crumbling castles. They had survived defeat, yes, but survival is not victory. The Grand Master, Hinrich von Plauen, managed to hold Marienburg through sheer will and stone. But the damage ran deeper than lost soldiers. Their myth, that divine armor often was gone, pierced clean through by Polish and Lithuanian lances. The years that followed were less glorious and more bureaucratic despair. The order bled silver as much as blood to rebuild. They taxed their Prussian subjects mercilessly. Farmers, merchants, and townsfolk who had once respected their discipline now saw only greed. Discontent spread, and the knights began fighting not pagans, but protests. Their fortress halls, once filled with prayers and plans for crusades, now echoed with audits and debt ledgers. God, it seemed, had better clients elsewhere. Meanwhile, their neighbors grew stronger. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had risen as a dominant power, while the Hanseatic League, that network of shrewd merchant cities, outpaced the Teutons in trade and diplomacy. The order, proud and stubborn, refused to adapt. They still dreamed in the language of crusades while Europe spoke in the dialect of profit and politics. The 15th century brought more humiliation. In 1454, their own subjects, Prussian towns and nobles, revolted in what became the 13 Years' War. They invited Poland to intervene, and the result was catastrophe. By 1466, the Second Peace of Thorn reduced the Teutonic state to a vassal of the Polish crown. The Grand Master was now forced to kneel before the Polish king and swear fealty, a sight that would have made their founders turn in their graves. The once independent Crusader Empire had been reduced to a glorified border administration. Even their own recruits dwindled. Fewer nobles wanted to join a bankrupt order that fought no holy wars. The fortress of Marienburg was sold, yes, sold to pay debts, and the headquarters moved to Koigberg. The white cloaks faded to gray, and the black crosses hung heavier than ever. the knights had conquered the Baltic in God's name. But in the end, they lost Ito, the oldest adversaries of all: pride, time, and paperwork. By the early 16th century, the Teutonic Order was little more than a ghost in armor. The Crusades were long over. The Reformation was shaking the foundations of Europe, and the knights, now stuck in their cold, echoing halls, were men out of time. Yet in 1511, a new Grand Master rose, who seemed determined to change it. Albert of Brandenburg-Ansbach, a young nobleman with more ambition. He was not the kind of man to rot quietly behind the ramparts. Albert wanted to revive the order, or at least save what could still be salvaged. But the timing couldn't have been worse. The Protestant Reformation had just burst across Germany like wildfire. Martin Luther was tearing down the old world with sermons instead of swords. And suddenly, vows of chastity and obedience didn't seem quite so fashionable. The idea of a monastic military order ruling land in God's name felt as outdated as bloodletting and astrology. Albert, to his credit, saw the writing on the fortress wall. He began negotiations with Poland, but pride and politics twisted the talks into knots. The Polish king Sigismund I demanded obedience. The same humiliating vassalage. So the young Grand Master did something no one expected. He betrayed the very foundation of the order. In 1525, under the advice of Martin Luther himself, Albert publicly renounced his monastic vows, embraced Lutheranism, and transformed the Teutonic lands of Prussia into a duchy, a secular state under polished suit. The Teutonic knights were no longer monks of war. They were now landlords. On April 10th, 1525, in Kov's Market Square, Albert knelt before King Sigismund and performed the infamous Prussian homage. In exchange for loyalty, he was allowed to rule Prussia as Duke, the first Protestant ruler of a Protestant land. To the old knights, it was heresy. To the modern world, it was pragmatism. The Black Cross had finally become a political emblem rather than a divine one. And so, after more than the Teutonic Order's Crusader state officially ended. What began as a hospital in the desert and grew into an empire of swords had dissolved into a duchy of paperwork, and Albert had saved the name Prussia, but buried the order that built it. When Theodist settled after 1525, the Teutonic Order was finished as a sovereign power. Yet, like all good medieval legends, it refused to die quietly. The knights, who did not follow Albert into Protestantism, regrouped within the Holy Roman Empire, where they become more symbolic than sovereign, keepers of memory rather than makers of history. Their fortresses were gone, their armies disbanded, but their legend, the White Mantle, the Black Cross, the image of holy order through discipline, lived on long after their swords rusted. Theater's remnants found a second life as a Catholic charitable institution, focusing once again on hospitals, education, and faith. Ironically, they ended where they began, not as conquerors, but as caretakers. Based in Vienna, the reformed Teutonic Order survived through the centuries, a faint echo of its crusading past. Their Grand Masters were now aristocrats, priests, and administrators, wielding pins instead of lances. The cross still hung on their cloaks, but it no longer cast a shadow across pagan forests, only across dusty archives and quiet chapels. Meanwhile, their secular legacy lived on in darker ways. The Duchy of Prussia, that Albert created a seed that would eventually grow into the Kingdom of Prussia, and from there into the German Empire itself. The Teutonic spirit, disciplined, militarized, and convinced of divine destiny, found new forms in Prussian kings and generals centuries later. The Black Cross, once stitched on Crusader banners, would reappear on Prussian medals, and even on the Iron Cross of later German armies. A haunting reminder that ideas once forged are hard. To historians, the Teutonic Order remains a paradox. Devout monks who built fortresses, holy men who ruled like emperors, and idealists who turned faith into an industry. They were the embodiment of medieval contradictions, both civilizers and destroyers, scholars and soldiers, confessors and conquerors. In their rise, one sees the genius of forgine, in their fall, the folly of hubris. Even now, their castles still red brick against gray skies, relics of a world where prayers were written in Latin and enforced with steel. The Teutonic Order may have vanished as a state, but its shadow lingers over every stone of the Baltic, a ghostly reminder that faith and power, once entangled, rarely part without blood. In the medieval world, wealth wasn't hidden behind castle walls. It strutted proudly down the great halls, shimmering in candlelight. Every robe, jewel, and goblet was a declaration, a wordless proclamation that said, "I am not like you." For nobles, luxury was never mere indulgence. It was politics made visible, a living performance of hierarchy and divine favor. God might have placed them above the peasants, but it was silk, silver, and ceremony that kept them there. When a noble entered court, he did not simply arrive, he appeared. His clothes spoke before headed. A tunic embroidered with gold thread could cost the same as a farmer's yearly harvest. Cloaks lined with hermine or sable whispered of power even before a word was spoken. For ladies, the layers of brocade and velvet weren't just decorative. They were armor in the war of status. Their gowns could weigh over 10 pounds, glimmering with imported dyes like Tyrian purple or Venetian crimson, shades forbidden to commoners by sumptuary laws. The color of one's sleeve, quite literally, separated the born to rule from the born to serve, but fashion was only one act in the performance. Every item in a noblesham was a prop in the theater of prestige. Silver platters reflected candle-light like halos, chalices sparkled with gemstones, and walls were hung with tapestries so thick they muffled, thickled. Even the furniture was designed to remind guests of rank. Raised seats for nobles, benches for everyone else. A noble's hall was less a living space and more a stage where power was rehearsed daily. And then there was scent, an invisible luxury. While peasants smelled of fields and smoke, nobles doused themselves in imported perfumes from the East. Their gloves were soaked in ambergris or rose oil. Their rooms burned with incense so rare it was worth more than gold by weight. To smell expensive was to be expensive. To a peasant plowing the fields, this level of opulence seemed almost divine, proof that nobles were chosen by heaven. To the nobles themselves, it was survival. Every thread and gemstone helped secure alliances, command respect, and maintain the illusion that they were born of a higher substance. In medieval world, luxury wasn't vanity. It was strategy, the costume offer. To step into a medieval royal wardrobe was to step into another universe, one stitched together from gold, silk, and unspoken hierarchy. Every fold of fabric carried meaning. Kings and queens didn't just wear clothes, they wielded them like weapons. A monarch's wardrobe was as important as an army, perhaps more so because it conquered hearts before swords ever. Take the robes of coronation, for instance. These weren't simple garments, but sacred relics in motion. They shimmered with real gold thread woven by Italian or Flemish craftsmen whose work was worth more than their weight in coin. The linings were mink, squirrel, or man. Creatures sacrificed said so royalty could appear untouched by earthly filth. Each gem sewn into the fabric symbolized virtues they rarely practiced: justice, mercy, piety. When a king sat upon his throne draped in that brilliance, no one saw the man, only the myth. Queens, meanwhile, turned fashion into diplomacy. Their gowns were coded messages, each fold whispering political intent. A French queen might wear Florentine silk to flatter an ally, or English embroidery to assert dominion. Necklines rose and fell according to virtue or vanity. Sleeves ballooned into absurd dimensions, and girdles gleamed with imported pearls from the East. The most daring queens, like Isabella of France or Eleanor of Aquitaine, used fashion to project authority in a man's world. Their gowns were battle armor stitched in silk. Even accessories were statements of divine theater. Crowns and circlets symbolized heavenly sanction, while jeweled brooches and signet rings stickled lineage and legitimacy. A misplaced gemstone could spark rumors, and a poorly chosen color could insult an entire kingdom. Thus, every public appearance was rehearsed like a play, with costume changes worthy of modern red carpets. Of course, not all monarchs practiced. Some wardrobes reached near insanity. Charles VI of France reportedly owned over 1,000 outfits, each tailored in new colors and lined with silver cloth. When Henry V appeared in public, his sleeves alone could pay for a small cathedral. These weren't people dressing for, they were draping themselves in symbolism, power, and calculated excess. In medieval courts, clothes didn't just make the man, they made the monarch. If medieval fashion was politics you could wear, then the banquet was politics you could eat. Or more accurately, watch other people eat. A noble feast was never just about food, it was theater. Diplomacy and intimidation served on silver platters. Every dish, every goblet, every note of music existed to declare one message: you are in the presence of power. The hall itself was part of the spectacle. Long tables lined with embroidered cloths, massive chandeliers dripping with tallow candles, and servants scurrying like well-trained shadows, all carefully choreographed. At the head of the hall, the lord and lady sat elevated on a dais, literally above everyone else. Even their plates were different, gold or silver, while the lesser guests made do with putter or wood. The message was clear. Hierarchy was not an idea, it was dinnerware. The feast began with ceremony. Heralds announced each course, minstrels played, and servants, sometimes 100 or more, moved in perfect sequence. The dishes themselves bordered on absurdity. Entire peacocks roasted and redressed in their feathers, gilded in gold leaf. Swans baked whole and reanimated with fireworks in their beaks. Meat pies hiding live birds, fate exploded into the hall when cut open. It was edible theater designed to stun the senses and humble the audience. Wine flowed like sermons, and even water could come perfumed with rose or some. Spices such as saffron, cloves, and nutmeg were the medieval equivalent of brand logos. Rare imports from Asia that screamed wealth. Only the elite could afford to turn a simple stew into an aromatic display of global trade. Eating was not just pleasure. It was proof of influence. But beneath the laughter and toasts, banquets were also battlegrounds. Seating arrangements could make or break alliances. Being placed too far from the host was a public humiliation. Being too close could be a trap of expectation. Every glance, every sip, every offered morsel carried political weight. Nobles did I just digest food. They digested opportunity. By the end of the night, when the last course of candied, fruited, spiced wine was cleared away, reputations had been built or broken. The host's glory was measured not in calories, but in whispers. How long people talked about the feast afterward. In the medieval world, you didn't dineto live. You dined to rule. Medieval castles were not just fortresses. They were stone manifestos. Every tower, tapestry, and stained glass window shouted one message to all who approached. This is power made permanent. While peasants huddled in timber huts and wiped soot from their ceilings, nobles lived in literal theaters of stone. Castles were designed not merely to defend, but to impress. Monuments to divine right, personal vanity, and generational ambition. The approach alone was psychological warfare. Visitors would cross Moe's gates and winding paths that forced them to look up, always up, toward Thelemming walls and towers. It wasn't just architecture. It was submission training. Even the smallest detail served hierarchy. A noble's private chamber had arched ceilings, imported tiles, and glass windows. A luxury so rare that entire villages might live without ever seeing one. Each pane, each gargoyle, each carved column whispered, "You cannot touch this world." Inside, the grandeur intensified. The great hall was the castle's soul, a multi-purpose arena for feasts, diplomacy, and displays of dominance. Tapestries the size of houses hung from the walls, depicting biblical scenes or family victories, partly to inspire awe, and partly to block the cold drafts that reminded everyone they still lived in a giant rock. Floors were strewn with rushes mixed with herbs, like lavender or mint, to disguise less divine odor. And the air shimmered with smoke from beeswax candles, the medieval equivalent of scented luxury. Private rooms told their own stories. Four-poster beds draped with silk or velvet served not only for sleeping but for spectacle. The bed itself was a symbol of rank. In many courts, guests were received not in throne rooms but in the lord's bedchamber, a sign of intimacy and superiority that blurred lines between domestic life and royal ceremony. Even the latrines could be lavish, with carved wooden seats and views of the countryside, because nothing said nobility like comfort in the most undignified moments. Castles were also laboratories of indulgence. Courtyards contained gardens of imported roses, fountains shaped like saints, and menageries filled with exotic animals, lions, falcons, even bears, depending on the owner's ego. The medieval elite didn't just live in castles, they performed in them. The stone giants were less about safety and more about spectacle. fortresses built not to keep people out, but to keep abomination in. In the medieval imagination, light was divine, and the wealthy made sure they sparkled. To shimmer was to show grace, to gleam was to prove favor from God. And so, from crown to chalice, the nobility wrapped themselves in brilliance, jewels, gold, and inima-warrant accessories. They were theology made tangible. Every shimmer on a noble's hand, every gleam from a goblet was a statement that heaven itself approved of their bank account. Gold was the ruling metal of age. It wasn't just currency. It was symbolism. It adorned belts, clasps, shoes, prayer books, and even horse harnesses. Some lords commissioned entire dining sets of solid gold, not because food tasted better, but because envy did. Their tables became reflections of celestial glory, literally, since gold reflected candlelight in radiant warmth. To dine in such glow was to feel touched by holiness. For those seated lower down, it was blinding in more ways than one. Then came the jewels, the true peacock feathers of nobility, rubies for courage, emeralds for fertility, sapphires for heaven's favor. The symbolism was as heavy as the crown that bore them. A queen's necklace might double as a political statement, each gem a gift from a conquered ally or an indebted rival. Even rosaries and crucifixes dripped with gems, because in medieval logic, devotion looked best in diamonds. The line between piety and pride blurred until no one could tell the difference. Not to be outdone, churches became showrooms of noble generosity. Gilded dalices, gem-studded reliquaries, and monstrances that could blind a pilgrim at sunrise. These weren't humble. They were public declarations that the donor was both rich and righteous. A single jeweled altar could represent the entire tax income of a town. But to the donor, it was an investment in divine PR. The more golden the altar, the better the odds of a favorable afterlife. And let's not forget personal accessories. Brooches shaped like saints, girdles of gold links, rings engraved with Latin mottos. These objects weren't just beautiful, they were armor for the ego. In the medieval mind, God's light shone brightest on polished surfaces, preferably ones that could be appraised by a jeweler. To glitter was to exist, and to exist magnificently was to be saved. If medieval nobility had universal language, it wasn't Latin, it was food. Every bite, every aroma, every golden goblet, lifted in toast, carried a message of rank, wealth, and sophistication. To dine like a noble wasn't merely to eat, it was to perform your social identity in front of an audience, of peers, servants, and spies. Meals were theater, and the script was written in roasted swans, spiced wines, and carefully choreographed etiquette. The menu itself was a declaration of power. Commoners ate barley bread, nobles dined on venison, crane, sturgeon, and the occasional dolphin. The rarer the dish, the higher the wages. To have exotic ingredients was proof of reach. Saffron from the east, sugar from Levant, and pepper worth its weight in silver. In a single banquet, a nobleman might consume the trade routes of the known world, one spoonful at a time. Food became geography you could taste and display, but there was an art to the spectacle. Courses could number in the dozens, arriving like military formations. First came the entr'actes, elaborate dishes of pure theater. Castles made of pastry, knights sculpted from marzipan, Entire ships crafted from bread and filled with sugared almonds. Guests didn't eat these creations. They admired them, applauded them, and understood their purpose: to make the host's wealth visible in 3 dimensions. The etiquette was equally intricate. Knives were personal possessions, forks still a curiosity, and fingers were fair game, but only fused gracefully. Napkins, often embroidered with family crests, were worn over the shoulder or tied around the neck. Guests were expected to carve delicately, to share politely, and most importantly, to appear impressed. To act unimpressed at a noble's feast was a social sin nearly as grave as spilling wine on a bishop. Music and pageantry filled the pauses between courses. Junglers sang of valor, jugglers performed, and fools provided moral contrast. Physical comedy for a night drenched in luxury. And through it all, the host watched like a hawk. Every compliment, every whisper, every expression of awe confirmed his triumph. To feast was to dominate politely. The food was temporary, but the impression was eternal. Long after the meat cooled and the goblets emptied, the story of the feast and the man who threw it lingered like spice on the meaty. Among all the extravagant pursuits of the medieval elite, none captured the essence of noble luxury quite like the hunt. It wasn't about survival. Nobles didn't hunt because they needed food. They hunted because Ethne needed to be seen hunting. It was theater in the open air where silk met mad and politics galloped alongside sport. To ride out with hawks and hounds was to remind everyone watching that leisure itself was a symbol of power. Hunting was the ultimate aristocrat, guarded by law and tradition. Forests were not free spaces. They were royal domains where peasants risked death for poaching a rabbit. The right to kill animals, absurdly enough, was considered proof that one ruled over men. Kings like Edward I of England or Philip the Fair of France maintained entire departments of staff, foresters, kennelmasters, falconers, just to manage the spectacle. Every detail, from the horses' harnesses to the dogs' collars, gleamed with embroidery and silver fittings. Even the arrows had style. The most elite form of hunting was falconry, the ancient art of hunting with trained birds of prey. A noble's falcon was asmic, a status symbol, as a crown. Falcons were bred, traded, and gifted across kingdoms, sometimes valued higher than castles. The G-falcon, pure white and deadly, was the Ferrari of birds, reserved for kings and emperors. A well-trained bird could take years to perfect, and its handler was often treated with reverence bordering on superstition. But beyond the birds and beasts, the hunt was about social choreography. A lord might invite rivals or allies to join him in the chase, a test of grace, courage, and stamina disguised as leisure. Every fall from a horse or missed shot could become court gossip. Conversely, a well-placed arrow or adoring pursuit through the woods could elevate one's reputation faster than any sermon or treaty. Afterward came theft. Venison roasted, horns blown, trophies displayed. The kill wasn't the climax. The retelling was. Servants paraded the carcasses through the hall as proof of valor, while minstrels simmertailed the day in verse. The hunt, like everything else in the medieval world, was political theater, a ritualized dance between nature and nobility. It reminded the world that the powerful didn't just rule the land, they owned its wilderness, its creatures, and the right to play God within it. If there was one thing medieval nobles loved more than showing off their wealth. It was doing so in God's name. Religion provided the perfect excuse for luxury. After all, who could criticize a jeweled chalice if it honored the Lord? The church and the aristocracy existed in a comfortable alliance of glitter and gilt. Nobles funded cathedrals, monasteries, and pilgrimages, not only for piety, but for prestige. Every golden altar and embroidered cope was a reflection of their generosity and conveniently their bank accounts. Annibal's piety was measured in marble and metal. Donations weren't made in modest coin, but in spectacle. Entire chapels were built as thank yous to heaven, their ceilings painted with divine murals, and their relics encased in silver filigree. The more elaborate the donation, the more impressive the faith. To a medieval, salvation was not a quiet inward journey. It was an architectural. The line between devotion and vanity was paper thin. A duke might fast for Lent, but he'd do it in a hall decorated with tapestries of saints woven in gold. A countess could sponsor a convent, but the nuns would end up wearing finer fabrics than most peasants. Even funerals were grand productions. A noble's tomb was never simple stone. It was sculpture, narrative, and PR. Carved angels held up the effigy. Inscriptions begged for eternal remembrance, and stained glass windows bathed the dead in manufactured linen. Then there were the pilgrimages, journeys that blurred faith and vacation. Nobles rode out dressed in silks rather than sackcloth, their entourages loaded with luxuries. Pilgrimage routes, like Santiago de Compostela or Rome, turned into traveling fashion shows. Relics were collected like souvenirs, and a visit to the Holy Land could elevate a noble's prestige for life. Of course, some conveniently sponsored others to go on their behalf, outsourcing holiness like a medieval business transaction. Through all of it, the church played along because opulence was contagious. Cathedrals rivaled palaces, abbots lived like kings, and bishops dined from Thessum golden plates as dukes. Religion became luxury's final mirror, reflecting the very excess it was meant to restrain. In medieval Europe, faith was not an escape from wealth. It was its most beautiful disguise. For all its gold, silk, and song, medieval luxury came with a steep and unspoken cost. Behind the jeweled crowns and gilded banquets lay a world of exhaustion, envy, and ruin. The nobles lived like gods for a reason, because the system demanded it. Opulence wasn't just expected. It was survival. To appear poor, even for a moment, was to invite weakness, rebellion, or ridicule. And so they spent endlessly, recklessly, until their debts gleamed brighter than diamonds. Maintaining such splendor required armies of servants, craftsmen, and accountants. A single noble household could employ hundreds: cooks, falconers, jesters, scribes, laresses, grooms, tailor, all paid to maintain the illusion of effortless magnificence. Behind every glittering feast was a line of overworked peasants, and behind every shining crown, a ledger full of unpaid loans. Money flowed like wine, but just as quickly evaporated. Many noble families quietly collapsed under the weight of their own performances, selling estates or marrying into wealthier bloodlines to keep the show going. The moral critics of the time noticed. Preachers thundered against vanity. Poets mocked it, and reformers warned that luxury rotted the soul. Yet even they couldn't resist the seduction of it all. When a cathedral gleamed with gold leaf or a Bishop Rodin, crimson robes, who could truly claim detachment from splendor. The medieval world was trapped in a beautiful paradox. Everyone despised excess, but no one wanted to live without it. There was also the matter of image. The noble's world was one of endless scrutiny from rival lords, courtiers, and even servants. A misstep in fashion, a poorly hosted feast, or a shabby horse could emerge a reputation more than a lost battle. Maintaining grandeur became a kind of anxiety, a constant war against decline. Luxury didn't bring peace, it brought pressure. Every gem was a reminder that you could never shine less brightly than yesterday. By the 15th century, as fortunes waned and kingdoms shifted, the great age of noble extravagance began to fade. Yet its spirit lingered in palaces, in royal courts, and eventually in the halls of empire. The medieval elite had turned life itself unsustainable art. Their gold may have tarnished, their castles crumbled, but their legacy of splendor still glitters faintly in every chandelier, every crown, every dream of power dressed in velvet. It began, ironically, with poverty. In 1119, a small band of knights, led by Hagdios and Godfried de Santori, vowed to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. They called themselves poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. A name that sounded humble enough, but destiny had a sense of humor. Within 2 centuries, these poor knights would become one of the wealthiest and most powerful organizations in medieval Europe. Not just warriors of God, but masters of fight. The idea was simple, yet revolutionary. Crusaders needed safety, not just from bandits, but from bankruptcy. Traveling from France to Jerusalem meant crossing hundreds of miles of dangerous roads with gold strapped to your belt. A perfect invitation for robbery, the Templars offered a solution that was centuries ahead of its time. Financial security. A pilgrim could deposit his money at a Templar preceptor in Paris, receive a coded document, and withdraw the same amount in Acre or Jerusalem. No gold to carry, no risk of theft. A medieval credit card system, complete with their own version of PIN encryption. Their headquarters, located in the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, gave them sacred legitimacy and a prime position in global trade. Denachants poured in not just coins, but lands, farms, and castles. Nobles eager to fund crusades and secure heavenly credit handed over entire estates to the Templars. Kings and merchants soon realized that the Knights' network stretched across Europe and the Levant, linking London, Rome, and Antioch through letters of exchange. The Templars were becoming something far greater than a military order. They were a financial empire with a sword. Their reputation for honesty was their greatest weapon. While secular lords squabbled and defaulted on debts, the Templars kept meticulous records and honored every contract. Their vaults were safer than any royal treasury, their word more reliable than any monarch's promise. Within decades, nobles entrusted them with not only their fortunes, but their secrets. And so, while the Templars fought on the battlefields of the Holy Land, their real power quietly grew behind parchment and ledgers. They were no longer just soldiers of Christ. They were the accountants of heaven, managing both sins and silver with divine precision. The poor knights had found a richer calling. By the mid-12th century, The Knights Templar had transformed from humble protectors of pilgrims into the most trusted financial institution. They didn't just guard the Holy Land, they guarded everyone's money. What began as an act of pious charity evolved into a sophisticated banking system that would make modern finance. The Templars had stumbled onto something extraordinary. Faith and finance could coexist and even thrive together. Their network of commanderies across Europe became the medieval equivalent of bank branches. These fortified estates handled deposits, loans, and transfers, all meticulously recorded by clerks in black robes and red crosses. A nobleman could deposit his wealth in a Templar stronghold in London and withdraw it in Antioch without ever touching a single coin. Their financial letters, early versions of bills of exchange, were encrypted with secret symbols known only to Templar accountants. In a time when illiteracy was common, the ability to read, write, and calculate made the Templars as dangerous as any army. But it wasn't just travelers who used their services. Kings did too. Monarchs found that the Templars could owe what no feudal treasury could manage, move, and multiply money safely. England's King Henry II used them to collect taxes, while France's Louis VI trusted them to transport funds for his crusades. In some regions, the Templars acted as royal treasurers, storing national wealth in their vaults. By the late 1100s, their Paris temple was effectively the financial heart of Europe. Even the papacy borrowed from them. A holy irony, if there ever was one. Their system thrived on trust, and trust was their true currency. While secular banks rose and fell, the Templars operated under divine protection, or so it seemed. Their spiritual status exempted them from taxes. Their papal privileges freed them from local laws, and their cross guaranteed safety even in enemy lands. A Templar letter of credit was as good as gold, and sometimes better. Still, their wealth was both their strength and their sense. The poor Knights of Christ had become lords of ledgers, and their Orderno controlled entire economies. Kings and popes tolerated their fortune for now. But as their coffers grew, so did envy. In a world obsessed with salvation, the Templars had achieved something far rarer. Liquidity and thatten. Medieval Europe was almost heresy. Across Europe, the Templar fortress became more than military strongholds. They were financial sanctuaries. Their commanderies dotted the landscape from Portugal to Poland, functioning as farms, training centers, treasuries, and banks, all in one. Each was built like a fortress because, well, it was one guarding both the sword and the coin. Beneath the chapels where knights prayed, vaults stretched into the earth packed with silver ingots, chests of coin, and sealed documents representing nuggin sums of money. The Paris Temple stood at the center of this golden web. It wasn't a church in the traditional sense, but a citadel of finance, the medieval world's closest equivalent to a central bank. Behind its fortified walls, the Templars safeguarded the treasures of nobles, bishops, and kings. France's royal treasury itself was stored there, including the personal fortune of King Philip the Fair, a decision he would later regret. The temple's security was legendary. Records described keys held by multiple officers, coded locks, and inventories so precise they would make modern accountants weep with joy. But the wealth wasn't idle. The Templars were not dragons, sitting at top gold. They were investors. They lent money to merchants for caravans, to lords for castles, and to monarchs for wars. Their funds built bridges, sponsored ships, and fueled the crusades themselves. The Knights of the Sword financed the Knights of the Cross. They had essentially become Europe's financial bloodstream, moving capital where the Church's conscience could not. Their influence seeped into every corner of society. A peasant might work Templar land without realizing his taxes funded a distant war. A noble might drink wine from a vineyard owned by the order. Even the clothes of a king might have been paid for with a Templar loan. Their power was invisible but omnipresent, the quiet hum of coin beneath the noise of philitics and prayer. By the late 13th century, the Templars were more than an order. They were an empire of trust, discipline, and numbers. Yet, for all their might, they made one fatal mistake. They never hid how rich they were. Their red cross, once a symbol of sacrifice, had become a target painted in blood and gold in the shadows of their temples. Envy was already sharpening its knives. By the 13th century, the Templars were no longer just holy warriors or guardians of pilgrims. They had become bankers of kings. Their services were indispensable, their discretion legendary. Monarchs trusted them with their treasures because the Templars answered to no one but the Pope. And when kings were forever in debt, which they usually were, the knights in white mantles became both saviors and creditors. Kings borrowed heavily from them to fund wars, build fortresses, and launch crusades that rarely went as England's King John, infamous for his temper and tax habits, used the Templar to manage royal revenues and even store the crown jewels. Later, his son Henry II kept his war chest in the Templar Temple in London, guarded by men who technically owed loyalty only to God. The irony was delicious. Monarchs ruled men, but the Templars ruled money. France, however, was where the relationship became dangerous. King Louis IX, St. Louis to his admirers, adored the Templars and made them his personal bankers, using their Paris headquarters to finance his crusades. Their reputation for reliability became so solid that ordinary citizens began to deposit money with them too. In an age of instability, a Templar safe was the one place no thief, not even a tax collector, dared touch. But that same reliability came with a subtle sting. The Templars did just lend to kings. They kept meticulous records of those loans. They charged interest through creative loopholes that technically didn't violate church law. On paper, they were rewarded for their services. In practice, they were collecting interest. It was clever, legal, and highly profitable. But it also meant that kings across Europe quietly became their debtors. This balance of power was unnatural in the medieval world. Monarchs were used to being owed loyalty, not gold. But the Templars had achieved something no one else dared: financial independence from any crown. They could bankroll a crusade or ruin a treasury, and that made them both essential and intolerable. While they prayed in their chapels and drilled in their courtyards, the knights were unknowingly tightening a golden noose around themselves. For kings, nothing was more dangerous than a creditor who couldn't be controlled, especially one who wore a crown. The Templars didn't just hoard gold, their operations were shrouded in mystery, protected by vows of silence and symbols that outsiders could barely comprehend. within their temples and commanderies. Only a select few knew the details of their financial dealings. Ledgers were coded, correspondence written in ciphers, and the keys to vaults were divided among multi-plebrothers so that no single man could open them alone. It was a system designed for trust and secrecy, the kin that breeds fascination and suspicion. In an age when most nobles couldn't even read, the Templars were masters of mathematics, logistics, and international communication. They spoke the hidden language of credit, collateral, and compound repayment, concepts far too abstract for most medieval minds. To commoners, their wealth seemed alchemical. To kings, it seemed dangerously efficient. And to the church, it looked a little too clever to be holy. Rumors began to swirl. People whispered that the Templars possessed secret scriptures, lost relics, or even the Ark of the Covenant. Their symbol, the Red Cross, took on an aura of mysticism. Some claimed their rituals involved strange oaths, hidden idols, or heretical prayers. The truth was more mundane, but equally powerful. The Templars' greatest secret was their ability to make faith and finance a code. That alone was enough to make them seem supernatural. Inside the order, discipline was absolute. Every knight swore to obey without question, to speak only when permitted, and to keep the affairs of the temple private under pain of expulsion or worse. Their meetings were closed to outsiders, and their financial methods were guarded as fiercely as their fortresses. In time, this veil of secrecy became a double-edged sword. It made them efficient and unassailable, but it also made them the perfect target for rumor and fear. By the late 13th century, their mystique had become myth. Pilgrims spoke of hidden tunnels beneath the Temple Mount. Merchants speculated about underground vaults filled with uncountable treasure. And while much of it was legend, one fact was undeniable. The Templars had accumulated power so great that no one could tell where their faith ended and their fortune began. In a world ruled by superstition and greed, that was as dangerous as any sword. By the dawn of the 14th century, the Templars had become victims of their own success. Their network of estates stretched across Europe. Their coffers overflowed, and their vaults were filled with the fortunes of kings. But their greatest client, and their most dangerous one, was King Philip IV of France, known to history as Philip the Fair, handsome in him only. He was a man with an expensive taste for war and a wallet that could never keep up. France's treasury was bleeding. Endless conflicts with England and Flanders had drained the crown's resources. And where did Philip turn for help? To the Templars, of course. They managed accounts, issued loans, and even acted as intermediaries in his financial dealings. For years, they had been the royal bankers of France, trusted, efficient, and discreet. But by 1305, Philip's debt to the Templars had grown astronomical, and his patience had run out. The king's envy and desperation mixed into something toxic. He needed money, but more than that, he needed control. And the Templars, untaxed, independent, and answerable only to the Pope, represented everything he couldn't dominate. Their Paris temple was a fortress within his own capital, its vaults holding more gold than his royal treasury. The idea that another power in France could rival his authority was unbearable. At first, Philip tried diplomacy. He floated the idea of merging the Templars with the Hospitallers, hoping to put both under royal influence. The proposal waspily ignored. Then came propaganda. Whisper campaigns spread through Francia, accusing the Templars of arrogance, greed, and corruption. People muttered that they had grown too rich for Holloman, too secretive for comfort, too powerful for anyone's good. The rumors began as political tools, but they would soon turn deadly. Meanwhile, the Templars remained confident, even complacent. They believed that their papal privileges made them untouchable, that no king would dare defy the Church to strike at a holy order. But Philip was not like other kings. He had already bullied a pope to death and installed his own. The Templars had lent money to a monarch who now decided he could erase his debts with one simple act: destruction. The stage was set for betrayal dressed as righteousness. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, a date that would forever haunt superstition, the hammer fell. At dawn, soldiers loyal to King Philip IV fanned out across France, armed with sealed orders. When appended, they revealed one command: arrest every Knight Templar. The king had moved swiftly, ruthlessly, and without warning. Within hours, Theon's feared order was in chains. The accusations were shocking: heresy, blasphemy, and devil worship. According to royal agents, the Templars spat on the cross, denied Christ, and kissed idols during secret rituals. It was a theater of lies, but a convincing one in an age terrified of damnation. Philip's plan was brilliant. By framing the order as heretics, he could seize their wealth under the guise of defending the faith. The Pope himself, Clement V, conveniently under Philip's influence, could hardly object. Interrogations began immediately, and they were anything but holy. Templars were tortured until they confessed to anything demanded. Some admitted worshipping a mysterious head called Bat. Others swore they'd renounced Christ. Confessions dragged from pain, not truth. The public, hungry for scandal, believed it all. The Red Cross for the Temple, once a badge of honor, now marked men as cursed. Their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was among those arrested in Paris, a veteran knight, nearly 70 years old. He expected an audience with the king, not shackles. At first, he believed reason would. He wrote to fellow orders, pleading for justice, unaware that his words would never reach them. Under torture, even de Molay confessed, though soon recanted. But by then the damage was done. The Templars' reputation had collapsed overnight. Meanwhile, Philip moved quickly to seize their assets. Vaults were opened, estates confiscated, and gold melted into royal coffers. But curiously, much of the fabled treasure was missing. The great Templar wealth, the gold said to fill the Paris Temple's vaults, had vanished before the arrests. Some said it was secretly moved by loyal brothers to England or Portugal. Others whispered it was hidden beneath the ruins of the temple itself. By the end of that cursed Friday, an empire that had taken 2 centuries to build was undone in a single morning. The banker knights had fallen, not by the sword, but by a signature. And with their downfall, the legend of the lost Templar treasure was born. The Templar trials were not courts of justice. They were theaters scripted by fear and greed. For 7 long years, the order was picked apart, one tortured confession at a time. The king's inquisitors paraded broken men before the public, demanding they confess to impossible crimes. The Templars, who had once commanded armies and financed kings, were reduced to shadows, bound, starved, and burned for a spectacle of moral cleansing. Pope Clement V, caught between loyalty to the Church and terror of Philip's wrath, tried to appear neutral. He ordered a papal inquiry, but the outcome was never in doubt. The evidence, all extracted under torture, painted the knights as heretics, and secret blasphemer's. It didn't matter that the accusations contradicted each other or defied logic. The verdict had already been purchased in gold. Some Templars stood firm even as their bodies broke. Many recanted their forced confessions, declaring their innocence before being silenced forever. The prisons filled with men who had once sworn oaths of chastity and obedience, now clinging only to dignity. Dozens were burned alive across France, their ashes swept away before dawn. Their estates were seized, their archives destroyed, and their symbols outlawed. The final act came in 1314 when Jacques de Molde, the last Grand Master, was brought to the stake on an island in the Seine. He had spent 7 years in chains, enduring interrogations that could crush any mortal spirit. But when given his last chance to beg forgiveness, he refused. Instead, he retracted his earlier confession and proclaimed the Templars' innocence. "God knows who is wrong," he said, staring directly at the royal envoys, "and he will judge us both." They burned him slowly by order of the king. As the flames rose, witnesses exclaimed, "Demly cursed Philip and the Pope," summoning them to face divine judgment within a year. Whether divine retribution or coincidence, both men were dead within months. The Pope of illness, the king in a hunting accident. Europe watched in silence as the ashes of the Templars scattered on the wind. Their order was gone, but their legend had just begun, purified in fire, immortalized in rumor, and sealed by a curse whispered through smoke. When the fires of 1314 died down, Europeus left with 2 mysteries: the disappearance of the Templar treasure and the endurance of their legend. Theorists had been thorough, the executions merciless. Yet, when royal agents opened the vaults of the Paris temple, the gold that was supposed to fill them was gone. Not a single coin, chalice, or jewel remained. For a king who had gambled his reputation to seize it, the empty chests were a divine joke. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered that the Templars had foreseen their downfall and spirited their riches away through underground tunnels beneath Paris. Others claimed a secret fleet had sailed from La Rochelle under cover of night, vanishing into the Atlantic. There were even stories that the treasure reached Scotland, where outlawed knights found refuge under King Robert the Bruce in the centuries that followed. These whispers would inspire legends of secret brotherhoods, hidden relics, and buried gold. Myths that would outlive every king and every papal decree. Yet, the true wealth of the Templars may not have been material at all. Their system of credit, their secure letters, and their international banking methods laid the foundation for Europe's financial future. Modern banking, insurance, and even accounting owe silent debts to the menace burned as heretics. The Templars proved that faith and finance could operate together, and that belief, when organized, could move mountains of money as easily as armies. After their suppression, the Templars' surviving assets were transferred to their rivals, the Knights Hospitaller, but the spirit of the temple survived elsewhere. In Portugal, King Denis quietly sheltered the remaining brothers, renaming them the Order of Christ under that banner. Former Templars would later finance voyages that opened the age of exploration, spreading their legacy not through war but through discovery. Over time, their name became a magnet for mystery. From alchemy to Freemasonry, from the Holy Grail to lost relics, the Templars became the perfect blank canvas for the human imagination, a brotherhood both holy and haunted. Their story began with vows of poverty and ended with legends of impossible wealth. And somewhere between faith and fortune, the Knights Templar